travelers, it's Kid Kenzar. I'm just stopping by to say that Jeremy, Jake, Jeff, and CJ have been absolutely killing it lately. Great job, guys. The episodes have been fantastic. Still one of my favorite shows to listen to. But with all that being said, I don't want to keep you guys any longer than I absolutely have to. We've got a cryptid or aliens or whatever conspiracy Jeff's got going on to learn about. So, welcome, travelers. You're listening to The Infinite Rabbit Hole. Enjoy.
Imagine that this line represents time. Present 1985. Future. Past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate you, me, and Einstein. Fuck. Reality for everyone else.
Welcome back to the Infinite Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy. Today, we're going to dive right back into where we left off last night on a special night of Infinite Rabbit Hole. That's right. We were here yesterday, Saturday. If you don't follow the social medias, then you probably didn't know that. So, yeah. So now you're going to get part 2 of Men in Black, and you're not going to hear part 1. And then everyone's just going to leave. Well, before we jump into the topic of the day, we will bring in the host, Jacob. What's up, dude?
Well, just left your house having a birthday party for your youngest son and came home and did a little bit of squirrel hunting and was successful. And then watched an episode of MasterChef with Whitney, and that's about it. That was my whole
Nice.
day.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice.
Oh, we went to a pumpkin patch too. Got a lot of pumpkins, so that was nice.
What about you, Jeff? What'd you do today?
Got up earlier than I wanted to, and then went fishing in the rain, and caught a fucking nice redfish today,
Nice.
and a pretty nice trout. Crystal caught a pretty nice trout as well. It's pretty awesome.
Good stuff, dude.
Went
Good
to
stuff.
IHOP, had some food at IHOP.
Nice.
You're in Florida,
Did you-
man. You got Waffle House down there.
Took a nap. We went to Waffle House, but there was a wait. But luckily on the corner, we have Waffle House, IHOP, Denny's, and Cracker Barrel all in the same corner.
That's dope.
Yeah, dude.
I've never
Jeremy,
had.
what'd you do?
My son had his birthday party today. I got to watch my Giants win a football game, which is strange. But it felt good. So there's that. And then I got to try this new beer today. It's pretty cool. Munster Fest by Three Floyds.
Nice.
Pretty good stuff. We are not affiliated with these people. This is not promotion. It's just me saying that I like their beer. Really good stuff.
Yeah, it is.
It's their Oktoberfest flavor, and I mean, it's phenomenal. Very good. All right.
Why is people are posting in the chat, but it's not showing up on our thing? The last one I see was Holomoto from Whitney. We got
I
Whitney
don't know.
posted again. For those who died, Crystal, Shadowban, Kenzar.
You're right. It's not showing up on Riverside. All right. Well, we'll just have to
It's
keep
not showing
Twitch
up in
up
the
too.
mod view on Twitch either, but
Really? All right. Well, we're going to have to push through it. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, do you guys have anything to say before we jump back into Men in Black?
That last
No,
guy was
man.
full of crap.
Yeah, he was.
All right. Well, I hope that if you're in here today, you either know about the Men in Black or you were here yesterday, because if not, you're going to be lost. It is what it is. We're going to start off the night by talking about Gray Barker. Over the years, Barker has been the recipient of many doubts from other researchers throughout the past few generations. It is even said that his family and close friends had come forward after his death in 1984 and claimed that Gray only published these books under his own publishing agency, the Saucerian Press, for financial gain. That in his real life, he was a skeptic of most things having to do with flying saucers and the paranormal. But those that knew him refute the claim and explain that Barker was not a researcher as much as he was a storyteller. He didn't go out into the world to find out why or how things happen. He told the story of what happened, which means sometimes he had to fill in the gaps with his own creative material. Either way, I am not trying to convince anyone to not use his works for your own research. I am simply giving you information to allow you to make your own decision with the details that we know. I personally will never pass up a book by Barker because I see it being extremely important to know where certain details come from, which turns out that many modern authors will pull their information directly from a Barker book without understanding that he tended to stretch the information for the shock value and pageantry. This often becomes confusion in various forms of paranormal communities and are taken as fact, which can be dangerous to the underlying goal of the group. So for one, I am an advocate for buying his books. For buying books by Barker, because then you can find where claims such as Injure Cold and Valiant Thor being from the same militarized alien team flying to Earth came from. With all that said, the one book that he was most known for was the book he published in 1958 titled They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which is credited with being the first book introducing the public to the concept of the Men in Black and their connection to ufology. In this book, Barker makes mention of Albert Bender's Men in Black experience, and you can clearly see why many circles now believe that Albert Bender's story is the first documented run-in with the Men in Black. Barker never outright claims this is true, but with it being such a highlighted topic, it is understood why so many now believe in the incident's importance as being more than what it actually was. Gray Barker first learned of Albert K. Bender and his world-famous International Flying Saucer Bureau in the magazine Other Worlds, published by Ray Palmer, while looking for the most recent addition to the famed Shaver mystery that we discussed in our Hollow Earth series by Richard Sharp Shaver. Gray would reach out to Bender and accept the position of chief investigator of the Department of Investigations with the IFSB after being offered the position by Bender himself. At the end of Chapter 5 in Barker's book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, Barker mentions a new twist to the story of Bender and his encounter with the Men in Black. In this outline, Bender laid in bed one night pondering the nature of flying saucers and concluded that he felt it was rock solid at the time of the true nature of flying saucers and drifted off to sleep. In the morning, he would write an article for the Space Review magazine that the IFSB published and send it to a friend for review for being published. But instead of getting a reply from his friend, Bender was visited by 3 men dressed in all black who approached his door with a letter firm in their grasp. It was during this encounter with the MIB that Bender was told that everything in the letter was 100% factual, and that he could never share the information with anyone else. There were even some threats to his life and livelihood mixed into the conversation, according to Barker, and this was the true reason for the shutdown of the IFSB. This story would go on to be the quote-unquote official reason for the closure of the IFSB that Bender would pass down to his friends and colleagues of the IFSB. But as mentioned in Bender's own book, this was not the real reason and was only concocted in order to provide a believable answer. Then, as mentioned earlier, Bender would eventually come forward with the true reason for flying saucers in his book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, after he was given the knowledge that the mysterious Men in Black were finally done with their current mission on Earth. This came in the form of a small metal piece shaped like a flying saucer, disappearing. By the way, the true answer to the mystery of the flying saucer was that they were the transport vehicles used by the extraterrestrials who used the image of the Men in Black to conduct UFO research, sabotage, while using said flying saucers to collect water from the Earth's oceans for use on their home planet. All right. I know there's a lot there, But
Can you just say that last part for me again? Like what? Just say that whole last sentence.
yeah, that's a big one. The true answer to the mystery of the flying saucer was that they were the transport vehicles used by the extraterrestrials who used the image of the men in black to conduct UFO research sabotage while using said flying saucers to collect water from the Earth's oceans for use on their own planet.
Used the image of the Men in Black. See, that's your voice to Skull Tech right there.
Mm.
Yeah, man. I wonder if
But
they're using
also
that on.
taking water. That's dumb.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is
there was
dumb,
this
right?
whole big
Tiny
thing.
little chips.
Well,
Pocket dimension type technology, right? Maybe they can cram shit into shit. I don't know. Right?
so
I mean, if they have that kind of technology, they could literally have a hose that goes from one dimension to another and sucks. Yeah.
Probably true too, I guess.
take our ocean, yeah. In the two books by Bender and Barker, they both talk about the water. Bender dives into the water more than Barker does. Barker just mentions it as in passing, where Bender, which his book came out after Barker's book, there's a whole thing behind why he couldn't come out and tell the real story. He was afraid for his life. Bunny ear quotes, right? And that he couldn't actually come out with the story until that little metal disc disappeared. So he used to keep this metal disc in a little safe or a box underneath his bed. And the Men in Black always told him that as long as that little disc is still in your box or that it still exists where you can find it, we're still here on this planet. Once we leave the planet, that disc will go away and you can come out with your story. So that's the whole reason, that on top of Bender's stories being out of complete left field, and nobody believing it at all.
Yeah.
So
it's total bullshit.
yeah, there's three separate stories that are told, right? There's the one about the very sexy female aliens that were rubbing oil all over his body that also cured him of a lot of illnesses and diseases.
Dude, that sounds awesome. What if that is this? Hold on, I'm sorry. What if that is the secret, right? And that's like the big secret they're trying to keep from everybody is like, really, we could cure cancer and all this stuff. We know the cure. The cure is just you guys
You just gotta have some sexy aliens oil down your butt.
oil you up, yeah, just oil you up and just give you the business, and you're
They
boom.
have to get every inch inside and out.
Oh, whoa,
Mm.
whoa,
Yeah.
calm down.
Yeah,
A lot
That's
of intestines.
That's a good massage right there,
Yep.
boys.
Mhm.
That's the kicker right there.
You
You
ever
live
been
forever.
You ever been massaged from the inside by sexy aliens?
That's the kicker, man. You can live forever, but you're gonna get wrist deep.
Hey, man. There's like chicks that do that on the internet now with like alien stuff, so it's not that out of the ordinary, I guess.
Different strokes for different folks, man.
I guess.
Bender liked that stuff.
Yeah.
So not much more to talk about there. The whole concept of Bender being visited by the Men in Black in his room was something that was in Barker's book, and it was not in Bender's book. So, at least in the same form, right? In Bender's book, he didn't talk about how he was laying in bed, falling asleep, and thinking about the truth of saucers, and it just dawned in his head. And then Men in Black came in his room and said, "Yeah, you're right." He talked about something completely different. Now, this is why I spent so much time talking about Barker, because Barker does this a lot. He does this with other topics that we've covered before, and I always put a disclaimer in there, because there's a lot of things that people believe that were mentioned in Barker's books and came from Barker's books. They're the earliest source of this information. And you have to be careful with a Barker book because Barker was a storyteller. He wasn't an investigator. He wasn't a researcher. He was a storyteller. So he took the story, filled in the gaps with his own imagination and sold it as that. He never claimed to sell books from his research. It was all stories.
They were all fiction. Yeah.
Right. And when we covered Injured Cold, one of the things I talked about was Barker's book and how he had Injured Cold and Valiant Thor coming from the same planet, flying on the same ship, being the same military, Valiant Thor being a higher ranking officer, and Injured Cold being a lower ranking officer. So, which is not mentioned anywhere else, either by Woody Derenberger, Tanya. In fact, I think we asked her about that in our interview episode, if I remember correctly. It may have been one that I just asked her just through text. But she also denied that. She's like, I don't know where he got that from. But yeah. You guys got anything?
If the IFSB was disbanded, does that mean that we could make a podcast for IFSB?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a copyright or anything to go with that. I wouldn't want to, but
No?
No.
It'd be all about just crapping all over alien topics.
I wouldn't crap on them. I find those topics interesting.
I know you do. I find them interesting too. I just don't believe them. That's all.
Jeff, you good?
I'm golden, brother. Let's go.
All right. We'll move on to the shushed cases. In his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, Gray Barker made connections with many other cases which involved people who were shushed by mysterious men after they had an experience of their own or came across some report of an event that they shouldn't have. One such man was given the pseudonym Gordon Smallwood. Smallwood's story was similar to the now famous Maury Island incident, which led to the first ever documented Men in Black encounter that we will cover in detail in a separate episode. Now, I know we talked about that in the previous episode a little bit, but we'll actually dive into the Maury Island incident on its own at some point. Gordon Smallwood came across a man after an event where a craft in the sky was seen expelling metallic materials in an undisclosed area. Smallwood approached the man and was able to secure a piece of the debris that the man had collected. Already being interested in the phenomenon of flying saucers and other UFOs, Smallwood began looking for ways to find out what the material could be composed of. To his surprise, it wasn't the lab that sent him back the results of the test. It was a man claiming to be of his country's government. The strange man was dressed in a gray overcoat and blue tie, which is much different than the typical Men in Black encounter, but the outcome was exactly the same. The strange man threatened not only Smallwood, but his wife and child as well, under the circumstances of him going public with his story and the medal. The strange thing here is that Smallwood was still given the results of the test that he ordered and was not so surprised to find that it consisted of titanium with a few other common metals and alloys. Barker would attempt many different times in a few different ways to pry some information from Smallwood, but he was very reluctant to let go of any major information involving the man and the conversation that he had with him. But one thing was for certain. Whatever the man had told Smallwood, it scared him enough to end his love of flying saucers. Just a few chapters prior to Barker's chapter on his attempted investigation into the case of Gordon Smallwood, Barker makes mention of another man's encounter with the MIB. Edgar R. Gerald was the founder of an organization similar to the IFSB out of Australia, titled the Australian Flying Saucer Bureau, who was approached by a mysterious man who claimed to have had incredible proof of what the flying saucers were. Unlike Bender's case, the man didn't approach the AFSB to tell them to shut down. Rather, he was very open to Gerald after he had sworn to keep everything said between the two of them a complete secret, even from his wife. However, the man did threaten action if any of the things discussed between the men were released in any kind of way. Threats that were so serious that the founder of another flying saucer investigation group would never speak of what was said, other than the conversation did happen, and what was shared with him was utterly shocking. But he believed everything the man said due to the evidence that he had presented during one of his 4 visits. John E. Stewart and Doreen A. Wilkinson were the 2 founders of the Flying Saucer Investigators of Hamilton, New Zealand, a much smaller research group dedicated to researching the nature of UFOs. One night, John would receive a strange phone call from a man who claimed to be from another planet. Quote, "Are you the John Stewart who is interested in what Earthmen call flying saucers? I warn you to stop interfering in matters that do not concern you." When John replied with a question regarding who it was that had called him, the voice gave a strange reply. "I am from another planet," and ended the call stating, "You have been warned." Although John hadn't laid eyes on anyone, this does show many signs of a run-in with the infamous Men in Black, such as the strange, unfamiliar way the person on the other side of the line converses and forms sentences, a strange, crisp sound to the phone call, as if the man was in a room with absolutely no sound or movement around him, or quite literally a void, and of course the threat of the threat to stop investigating flying saucers. For a while there, nothing came of it in the form of aliens or flying saucers, but both John and Doreen reported run-ins with invisible entities in and around their personal homes. One particular one, which John describes, was when he watched a pair of moccasins walk across his living room and stop in front of the fireplace, where Doreen's one report described her being chased by an invisible culprit one night on her front porch as she was walking into her house. She could hear footsteps behind her, and when she turned to face the stalker, she was shocked to see nothing. But when she turned back toward the door, the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard coming from around her house. Again, she looked back to see nobody before she finally entered her home for the night. In 1955, John Stewart would write to Barker for the last time, explaining how he came across a strange piece of metal that had fallen from a UFO, and how a strange man came into his life. Quote, "I had a visit from a bloke who offered me some advice. After he had left, I felt I should listen to what he said. You see, I had a piece of gray-white metal, and, well, I haven't got it. Our friend thought he had more right to it than I did. I have learned a lot about UFOs from this lad. Oh, yes, he told me a lot. Too much, maybe, for my own personal safety." This would be his goodbye letter to Barker in the world of saucer research. John and Doreen would completely split with their obsession, just as many others did after coming in contact with one or a few strange, formally dressed men. In this section, in which we discussed Albert Bender in large, I made quick mention of a man by the name of Jim or James Moseley. Moseley was a new researcher to the field who had reached out to Barker in hopes of getting hints and tips about not only flying saucers, but also how to publish in general, but also about publishing in general, as it was his wish to begin his own magazine. The magazine would eventually find the newsstands under the title Saucer News, but its early interest in finding the truth about flying saucers was changed suddenly in October 1954, when he had announced in the headline, "The flying saucer mystery solved," with the last sentence reading, quote, "I would like to caution all flying saucer researchers to be extremely cautious in dealing with certain phases of the saucer mystery." Sound familiar? It was practically the context of the final line given by Bender in his last edition of the Space Review magazine, in which he published favorable information on flying saucers. Among these particular examples, Barker has also described the cases of Elliot Rockmore of Flying Saucer Review and Harold H. Holton. It would seem that another person was shushed, and it was at this point that the MIB were given their first title that described the concept that we now know as Men in Black on an international and familiar level. Gray Barker would go on to refer to them as the Silence Group. So, we we see an evolution here. So at first, the MIB were known as the Three Men because they always showed up in groups of three.
Yeah.
Then Barker gives them the title of the Silence Group, and then eventually we move on to the Men in Black, which is a title given to them by John Keel.
It just seems like a lot of these encounters, especially from like these time periods, not just this one, but other ones we've talked about over the years, right? It's just like it always seems to me to have a very like the story always fits that time period, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense. Like what years are we talking about right now exactly?
70s? No.
70s.
No. It's 50s.
I thought we were talking about the 50s, right? Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. So, and you said something about like this guy saying like, I'm from another planet. Like it makes me think of these cartoons from the 50s, right? Where it's like, I'm from another planet. Like we are here for, you know what I mean? Like it seems to me, or at least that's what I get the vibe from when I hear any of these not any of them, but a lot of them. It's like I saw a saucer. It was a silver saucer. And it was flying over the car. Like it just seems very sure it was, man, because that's what it would do, right? I don't know. It's weird.
No, it's a good point. It's definitely a good point. The saucer phenomenon started in 47, with that gosh, what was his fucking name? I'm drawing a blank. I can't believe that.
Guy.
Kenneth Arnold.
There
with his sighting over, I want to say it was over in Mount St. Helens in that area. I know it was in Washington State, but anyways, he saw the 9 figures in the sky, and he reported how they were shaped, or they moved such like saucers on the water, right? Basically the same as I would describe as skipping stones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he took that, or the AP Newswire took that and turned it into flying saucers.
Yeah.
Which actually what he saw was more boomerang shape than saucer shaped. So it's.
I think I made the same criticism to Tanya Derenberger when we had that talk with her. I was like, it always just seems so like convenient that these stories, because like dude just, like the descriptions of him was like your typical dude in that time frame. Like why would these aliens be looking like this? Why wouldn't they show up looking totally different, dressed in some I don't know, some ancient Mayan regalia or some kind, some weird shit,
Yep. They choose to come looking like people.
Yeah, dressed as, in a suit from the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, I'm honestly not too skeptical, I guess. If the federal government or someone associated with the federal government has been researching UFOs for so long, I mean, the amount of making people disappear that the federal government has, it would make a lot of sense to me if someone showed up. It couldn't, you can call them whatever you want, the Men in Black, the silencing group or whatever, right? But someone shows up from the feds to tell you to stop your research of UFOs because you're getting too close to the answer that's, top secret. They don't want it getting out. And if you don't, you'll never be found.
Mm-hmm.
Your family will just lose contact with you. There's no obituary. There's no grave. You will disappear and never be found again, type stuff. That would be enough to get me to stop, doing a podcast or, doing a magazine or something like that, right? And it's just like, okay.
I knew you were a shill.
Yep. Well, but then again, you have other outliers like, gosh, what's the guy's name? The Area 51 guy. Or the
Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar. You get
Oh,
those
yeah.
sorts of guys that are just like, it doesn't matter what you say to me, I'm going to do what I want to do, right?
Mhm.
And then, prove it, right? Type stuff. So, but, just coming out of World War II, everyone's so, don't want to get pegged for being a traitor or treasonous and all that sort of stuff. The communism scares coming, all that sort of stuff. But, and that would be rough too, saying like, if I were in that time frame to make a threat to someone to stop them from doing what they were doing, to be like, not only will you never be found and you're going to have a horrible, terrible death, but also we're going to spin a story that you were in fact a communist or you were a Hitler supporter or whatever it was. And not only are you going to die, but it's going to ruin the life of everybody in your family and type stuff. Like it's, you ran away to go join the socialists or something like that. Right. So it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I'm not too jumpy on the whole idea of like, oh, well, all this stuff is made up. Certainly I don't believe that they were aliens, but government workers coming to shut something down. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. I would think that the Men in Black would be much scarier, right?
Yeah.
Like kind of along the lines with what you were saying. And the thing that really bothers me about Bender, instead of going down the threat path, instead they went down the path of, oh yeah, why don't you come and hang out with all of our most beautiful women and get oil massaged.
Oiled from the inside to the outside.
Like, oh man, what a threat.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm gonna save my opinion for what I believe with the Men in Black at the end, because I already know what's coming up. So,
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's where you have me and Jeff. I mean, I guess I could read your whole script, but I'm not going to. But because I want the surprise of it. But from what I've heard so far, like that one seems more legit to me. Is someone being scared to the point of stopping their research into something because this something is so high in the national security, realm that if you start getting kind of close to the answer, especially in that time frame, I don't know about now you could make up, someone's got to be right. We've said
Yeah.
enough things on the show. One of us has to be right at this point. But back in the day, with the threat of espionage and being a traitor and all that sort of stuff so high, I think that there might have been that sort of a reaction of, these people are getting pretty close to the real answer. Someone go shut it down and make sure that they stop, right? Type stuff. And if they don't, then we'll do further action. So I'm not surprised by this.
Where was I going with this? Damn it. Oh,
Nowhere.
yeah, I lost it. Thanks. Damn it.
You're welcome, dude.
Yeah. Now I just sound stupid. Anyways, I do want to take a quick shout out real quick for those who died. Thanks for the follow. Appreciate that. You guys ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to talk about John Keel. I'm personally a huge fan of John Keel, as the man truly had an advanced way of thinking about certain details about investigating Fortean topics that I believe are too absent from the modern-day researcher's repertoire. Keel was a reporter, and to those that knew him, they would often refer to him as weird, sensationalistic, thoughtful, brilliant, obsessive, and often gave people the creeps. Alan Greenfield was quoted by author Nick Redfern as saying this about Keel, quote, "There was, shall we say, some definite poetic license in Keel's writing, but he was an absolutely fascinating individual to sit down and talk with. He had a spellbinding voice. I would not refer to him as a friend. He actually gave me the creeps. If he had put on a black suit and come to my door, I certainly would have thought, this is one of the men in black. Overall, there was a very mixed set of thoughts and feelings about Keel. But one thing that everyone seemed to agree on was that he was very passionate about the subjects he researched, and he certainly knew what he was talking about. Barker was a ufologist, and Keel was a reporter. And it was clear that their work and research were very different, although the topics they covered often overlapped. Even though I am a huge fan of Keel, I still take his publications with a grain of salt. It is true that he was a brilliant mind, but his intense interests made him succumb to a few tricks that he took as fact, and more than a few of those came directly and admittedly from Gray Barker and a close friend of his, Jim Moseley. John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, was published in 1975 and is the best known among many other great books that Keel had published in his lifetime. It too happened to highlight the so-called Men in Black in a majority of the book. Overall, The Mothman Prophecies covers many topics ranging from UFOs, alien beings such as injured cold, strange phenomenon happening to people's phone lines, a plethora of out-of-towners that swamp the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the Men in Black, a wide series of strange shoe prints that seem to match what would later be used for the astronauts who visited the moon, and the print that it left in the solar soil. And of course, it also touches on the story of the Mothman. In fact, the book is about his intended research into the Mothman phenomenon in Point Pleasant, but turned into a descriptive retelling of the other high strangeness that he witnessed during his time in the area, most of which had seemingly nothing to do with the Mothman. Yes, there is a Hollywood movie adaptation of the Mothman Prophecies, but it is not one of those movies you can watch and get a decent idea about what the book is about. Hollywood took John Keel's book and took the bare minimum out of the publication and refilled it with many common tropes that are mimicked in Hollywood films throughout their history. But enough about the movie. In the very beginning of this amazing piece of literature, Keel tells of a report of an over 6 foot tall man dressed entirely in black who was knocking on the door of a local farmhouse late at night. Quote, he wore a black suit, black tie, black hat, and black overcoat with impractical black dress shoes covered with mud. Quoted from the very first page of the Mothman Prophecies. This would happen to be a common report coming from the immediate area of Point Pleasant in 1967 and was the basis for various parts in the early portion of the book. But this specific account is of interest as 3 weeks later, the couple who had answered the door for the mysterious man dressed in all black passed away when the area suffered its most deadly event in its history, the collapse of the Silver Bridge. But shortly after the introduction to this report, Keel reveals that this particular encounter was a retelling of an encounter that wasn't actually an MIB, but rather it was himself who came to that farmhouse door late at night asking to use a phone after his car ran off the road. It was an honest attempt at finding a phone to use to call a tow truck. Just prior to showing up to the Ohio Valley area, John Keel was in Atlanta, Georgia with a Miss Mary Heyer giving presentations on the UFO phenomenon. It was when they were a few miles outside of Gallipolis, Ohio, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, did John's car break down and he was forced out in the rainy night to find a phone to use. At the end of December in 1967, Mary Heyer would have her own strange run-in with the Men in Black that we will discuss in the last portion of this entire presentation, where we discuss encounters with the MIB. But due to Heyer's encounter and many others that he details in the book The Mothman Prophecies, Keel explains that there was something strange going on, and it involved some very questionable characters dressed in all black suits in an area of the country that wasn't very well known for such attire. In Chapter 13, a chapter titled Phantom Photographers, Keel describes a strange coincidental set of 3 incidents that happened to himself, Mary Heyer, and a fellow director by the name of Dan Drayson, who was to head to Point Pleasant area to the who was to head to the Point Pleasant area with Keel to shoot a video about UFOs. All three of them had an instance where a strange man dressed in all black took photos of them from a fairly close-up distance. Keel would go on to mention a few other specific circumstances, some of which I will cover in our last episode of the series when we discuss encounters, as well as the point that he had received similar reports of black-garbed men taking photos of people who witnessed UFOs or other strange phenomenon from across the country, and even included a report or two of men in England in 1973. In the 2 years of 1967 and 68, Keel would go on to gather hundreds of reports of strange sounds in people's phones across the country. Many of the people would report it as a perverted man breathing into the phone, getting some sort of sick thrill over hearing a woman's voice on the other line. But when Keel began receiving these calls as well, he would come to describe the sound as too mechanical and regular to be someone's breathing. He compared the actual sound to that of the sound of a phonograph when it is at its end. He was convinced that these strange sounds, which were sometimes accompanied by other sounds such as beeps, were electronic in nature. After a little investigation of his own phone lines, he found that it was a phone tap that was the culprit. Someone had been trying to listen to his conversations. All right. So, The Mothman Prophecies is a book about John Keel's trip to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and other areas of the Ohio Valley in that general area along the Ohio River. The reason why he's there is to look into the Mothman. While he's there, he finds that there is something going on with black suited men. And there's also a strange group of other men that are wearing black coveralls, neatly pressed, saying that they're from the hydroelectric company. And they're all over the place. There were people that were reporting them working on the bridge the day that it collapsed. If you remember when we talked about the bridge in the Injured Cold series, I want to say 50-something people died. It was 2 or 3 days before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
So in a small town like Point Pleasant, West Virginia, or was a small town, it's getting up there now. People notice when there's people that look strange.
Right.
And when you see a company that you don't recognize and you see that the entire area is swamped with people and they're sharing the same skin pigment as these mysterious men in black, by the way. The men in black in the Mothman Prophecies were a dark olive color. So was Injured Cold, by the way. And so were these mysterious men who were working for the hydroelectric company. So, and a lot of our encounter stories that we'll do in the last episode come from the Mothman Prophecies.
I wonder if maybe they're clones, man.
Maybe
Maybe they're, they're not aliens or anything. Maybe they're just clones, built in a deep underground military facility somewhere, something like that, and that's who they have. Like I still kind of think that it's just the the muscle for the shadow government. If there's no better term, I need to find a better term than shadow government, but you know what I mean.
I hear you. What do you think,
Weird.
man?
I don't know what I think. It's weird.
You guys ready to move on?
I'm glad to hear, though, that the book is different from the movie, because I was very confused when I watched the movie, and I was just like, all this stuff is in this guy's book? Like that's...
It's not. It's not. It's a terrible movie.
I liked the movie. I liked
Really?
I liked it when the main character was on the phone towards the end, and he was on the phone with Injured Cold. I thought that was pretty cool.
There was some parts that were pretty cool. They got some things right, but honestly, it is bare bones what the book's about, man. The book is great. I
Yeah.
love that book. It's very old. I mean, it's from the 70s, right? But there's definitely some there's some
No,
choice
non-PC stuff.
choice descriptions of people, words that we don't use now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that I condone it, but for what it is, a piece of history, especially within Fortean studies, it is a phenomenal book.
Well, I'll see if they have an audiobook, and I'll listen to it while I'm at work.
You should. It's very good.
Crystal said you seen that terrible movie, but not Star Wars.
That's true. I did see that terrible movie. Saw that terrible movie twice before I ever watched Star Wars. All right, so I will say that I have attempted to watch Star Wars a couple times in my life, and I fell asleep. And I fell asleep probably within like the first 3 minutes.
Nice. I got it on an audiobook, so I'll give it a listen.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Aren't you proud of me?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Look at you.
I might not know how to read, but I can listen.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's good stuff, man. I am
Yeah.
proud of you.
Thanks, dude.
All right, you guys ready to move on?
Ready.
All right, let's talk about Keel's stance. Keel spent a lot of time researching various cases of various phenomena throughout much of the world. In the case of Men in Black, in the book Mothman Prophecies, Keel describes the humanoids that were plaguing certain areas of the country in the 70s as, quote, he is built exactly like us, stands from 5 feet 6 inches to 6 feet tall, looks very human, but has high cheekbones, unusually long fingers, and an oriental cast to his features. His complexion is olive or reddish. He speaks every language, sometimes mechanically as if he is reciting memorized speech, sometimes fluently. He has trouble breathing, often wheezing and gasping between words. John Keel had a very wide range of beliefs on various topics of the Fortean, and one such belief centered around the idea of how many UFO clubs had attached the extraterrestrial title to the concept of the Men in Black. His explanation for how this was not a very good deduction was simple. Someone who is obsessed with UFOs and the idea of little green men from a planet far away in the void of space would no doubt conclude that the phenomenon of the Men in Black came from the same planet or even the same race as the aliens who fly the UFOs we commonly see in the skies of our planet, which would leave most of this group to overlook any and all other possibilities. Another common interpretation from tribes of UFO researchers is to place the blame on the villain of their own story, which in most cases ends up being the government or the military. Although both of these have a chance of being true, neither of them deserves 100% of one's attention when attempting to discover the truth about these Men in Black. This same concept is slightly twisted when he dips into the idea of how the government or military hires astronomers or astrobiologists to lead their many different secretive UFO investigation committees, most of which we discuss in episodes 182 and 183 in our U.S. government UFO programs 40s to the 90s series released in September 2024. The problem with this is that an astronomer will only help with the idea that the beings come from space. But if the truth is that UFOs and the Men in Black come from here on Earth, then we are literally looking in the wrong direction and completely ignoring the thought of turning around and facing the other way. He explained how this was also seen in cultures throughout the world and time. Medieval Scotland, Ireland, and Wales attached the legend of the Fae to anything and everything unexplained. Many cultures have attached the title of gods to mysterious beings throughout history, while Christians point to demonic figures for the same. While in the modern world, we have attached the word extraterrestrial to a human-like figure that we are unfamiliar with. But are any of these true? Unfortunately, we may never learn the answer to this question, but you can see what John Keel was trying to explain about influences and how different groups of people will look at a phenomenon such as the Men in Black and attach different titles to them. But it was Keel's opinion that there was nothing extraterrestrial to the Men in Black. Throughout his 25 years of research into the subject, he had created a new term to describe these beings, ultra-terrestrials. He defines the term ultra-terrestrial as being, quote, beings and forces which coexist with us but are on another time frame. That is, they operate outside of our space-time continuum, yet have the ability to cross over into our reality. He believed that the place, if you can call it that these ultra-terrestrials came from, is less physical, but rather it is a state of energy instead. He comes to this as his best possible answer at the time the Mothman Prophecies was written, and points to a long history of people seeing lights or objects in the sky. In the 1400s, they believed that they were looking up and seeing witches flying around. Ancient China believed they were dragons. Ancient Egyptians and South Americans believed that they were their gods. Fairies make their appearance here as well, as many Celtic cultures believed that the Fae were the culprits. Various tribes of Native Americans had their own answers, such as spirits, witch doctors, gods, or in some cases, little people, very much the same as Fae. Today, we look at the same lights and attach the terms that were propagandized to us our whole lives, such as extraterrestrials. But one thing is for sure, they have always been there, and it would seem that they always will be. So they must be environmental and natural to the Earth itself. But why can we not discover who they are or where they are from? Because according to Keel, we may not live in the same dimension or even on the same plane of existence. They may be beings that live outside of what we know as the physical realm. So what do you guys think?
I agree. Demons. That's all they are.
Yeah,
Jeff
I mean,
agrees too.
look, there's a part of me that does for sure. It's probably more likely a man-made phenomena. I think clones
probably.
or just people or whatever. It's my lab. It's probably a offshoot project from my lab projects. Is what I really think it is. But again, there are, like I said at the very beginning, before you even talked about any of this, there's Men in Black all the way down the ladder, right? Like even for basic shit, right? They'll come knock on your door for if you type the wrong shit on the internet. So, but yeah,
I'm gonna look up on my phone. An alien spaceship crashed in my backyard. What do I do? And see who shows up.
what I was looking up while you were talking was if there was any ancient stories of anything that might resemble the Men in Black, right? And I couldn't really find anything just in a couple minutes, but
Hey,
that would be interesting.
I got you.
You got something? Okay.
I got something. It's probably not exactly what you're looking for, but I talk about it in the very next topic.
Because that, to me, would be the difference, right? Like, what would make these aliens from other civilizations interact with us differently now than then, right? Why then would they show up and give our ancestors knowledge or whatever the stories were at the time, and now all of a sudden they're showing up as like dudes in suits, trying to keep us from knowing the truth or whatever the case is.
Crystal says, this dude sounds creepy as fuck. Is she talking about John Keel? John Keel's not creepy. He's weird, but he's not. Yeah, maybe he is creepy. But he's smart. He's smart.
The breathing thing? She said the breathing thing.
The breathing thing? I don't know. What?
Say it loud, what? When he was talking, he had to catch his breath or something? I don't know.
Oh, is she talking about me?
No, the fucking guy you had a description going on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you, Jeremy. She's like, yeah, Jeremy.
Yeah.
John Keel.
I don't like the way that guy breathes. I want to punch him in the throat. All right, you guys ready to move on? This is the last section.
What are they? Tell me, Jeremy.
The title of this section is "What Are They?" Thanks, Jake.
Oh, cool. I guess I'll find out.
Going back to the beginning of this presentation, I stated 3 questions. One of which was, who are they? Although nobody can say for sure, there are a lot of options and theories that have been bounced around. Theories ranging from hallucinations, hoaxes, tulpas, vampires, time travelers, members of the government, demonic entities, cosmic tricksters, and even other civilian researchers that want to get rid of their competition. In the case of Keel, Bender, and Barker, there is the theory that the Men in Black phenomenon could be caused by hallucinations or simply a hoax. Bender was a man who suffered from severe migraines and often admitted to seeing things that may not have actually been there. With the propulsion of the topic in Barker's book in regard to Bender's incidents, a common theory is that all of the reports of strange men in black are simply people who are overthinking, misinterpreting, or hoaxing an idea that was made famous through these two men. Same could go for Keel, and possibly many others when it comes to the theory of hoaxes in general. Keel was susceptible to believing hoaxes and even reported on them as facts a few times. In his incredibly popular book, The Mothman Prophecies, Keel lays out his research and experiences on the story of the population of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the surrounding areas, issues with strange men knocking on the doors in the wake of the Silver Bridge collapse and the Mothman sightings. Gray Barker, being a known prankster of sorts, or at least a man who liked to entertain, has admitted to being the source for a few incidents mentioned in the book. But what is unclear is how many incidents were fabricated by Barker and believed by Keel. Could Keel have created an entire best-selling book off of pranks played by Barker? Unlikely, but not impossible. Then there were those that reported Keel himself as being one of the strange men knocking on the doors wearing an all-black suit. So the same question is asked if it is possible that followers of Keel could have been reporting their own incidents due to a hoax that was played on Keel. Then there is, of course, the possibility that these reports by Keel and Bender are real and the future reports are hallucinations or hoaxes, as well as the possibility that they all are hallucinations or hoaxes. But I personally find it unlikely. In our coverage of the Slender Man in episode 153, I dove into the concept and a bit of the history of tulpas, and there are many out there that believe that the Men in Black are also a form of tulpa. As a very brief summary of the concept, a tulpa is a physical manifestation of an entity due to someone's thoughts or a culmination of a group's efforts through either belief or prayer. Basically, the question surrounding the theory is, could the entire phenomenon of the Men in Black only exist because people believe they exist? Author Nick Redfern has a really good case for this theory in his book, The Real Men in Black. He begins by explaining that MIB encounters seem to be extremely randomized. What he means by this, in particular, is that it would seem that it does not matter how big of an event it is that they show up for. They show up to big and small events alike. Some of the most insignificant incidents have had the presence of these black suited beings show up, and some of the most impactful and highly publicized events have not. It would seem that there is a possibility that they show up to those that are aware of them. One thing about tulpas is that they require intense emotional states to be able to manifest. Then someone sees something that they believe to be from outside of their known existence. This would trigger the emotional response that would typically be needed in order for a tulpa to appear. And if the victim happens to know about the phenomenon, then you will have all the ingredients for a visit from the Men in Black. The specific emotional response that they are thought to be looking for is fear. The concept of the Men in Black possibly being a tulpa vampire of sorts is a common theory as well. Vampires and these Men in Black have a few things in common. The traditional vampire has been described on many occasions, albeit mostly by Hollywood, as a humanoid creature with pale or white skin, a frail body, and if they are wearing clothes, it has been commonly portrayed that the clothes are a three-piece black suit with a white undershirt. But the real interesting bit to me is the weird detail that many Men in Black encounters feature the beings not coming into the person's home unless invited. There are even reports of them standing awkwardly at the door with the homeowner holding the door open for them and only entering when they are given a verbal or physical cue. Now we bring the tulpa into the vampire theory. What if the vampire wasn't or isn't a being that is set for blood? What if they only show themselves as what you believe to be the most frightening thing in your beliefs? In the past, This may have been in the form of a frail human with large teeth that would drain you of your blood and leave you for dead. But today, it comes in the form of a government looking official coming to silence you when you witness something you fear you shouldn't have. Ultimately, the feast wouldn't be on blood, it would be on fear. Therefore, the old concepts of vampires were wrong. The witnesses were only reporting what they saw. In a nutshell, the MIB could be vampires, but they show themselves in a modern form, with the possibility that vampires themselves were tulpas to begin with, who require the fear that you radiate when in a frightening situation. I personally thought this was interesting and may be the best explanation for the existence of the MIB. But the first thing that came to mind in response was, what about those that did not know anything about the Men in Black, other than there was a series of comedy action films made about a secret organization said to be the controllers of the flow of alien beings in and out of the planet we call home and information pertaining to such. This happens, and it seems to happen a lot. I don't know if that would be enough to elicit a response in the shape of a tulpa, as I have to admit that my tulpa knowledge is a bit limited, but as outlined by many authors of books in my various topics of research, tulpas can become reality, and if they are now real, you don't need to believe in them. They now exist either way. Then there are those that tie the Men in Black with the fairy folklore of various countries in Western Europe. Some even claim that they are the tricksters that are told of in various lore and mythologies throughout the world. But one of the more informational theories about the modern Men in Black is that they are simply either people mistaken for Men in Black or they are people trying to portray themselves as the Men in Black. Nick Redford makes a really good point as he mentions the cutthroat nature of various ufological groups. Each one is trying to have the exclusive rights to as many stories as they possibly can. I can comfortably say that this point is extremely valid. UFO groups are horrible, and everyone tries to cut the other guy down a few pegs on a regular basis. A group who is aware of the lore behind the Men in Black may very well be dressing up as the MIB only to come to your home and tell you to drop all research on a specific subject and to not talk to anybody else about what they saw. This also helps answer the question about why the MIB seem to choose certain cases at random. The UFO research community does a great job at combing through all reports, mostly because the bulk of them come directly to them via reporting forms people can fill out on various websites. There is no doubt in my mind that this has happened a number of times, but yet again, I don't think this is the only answer. There are plenty of cases where the experiencer has never come forward about what they saw. They never told a soul about that night when they were walking home and a flying saucer flew overhead. But yet, the Men in Black arrive. Then what about a government agency being behind the MIB? This I can also see as being true for a large sample of encounter stories. I mean, the Men in Black that show up in military outfits or with FBI badges may actually be from a branch of the military or the FBI. They do not always need to be actual men in black suits and could easily be mistaken for members of the mysterious MIB. No, to me, the very best possibility of who or what the Men in Black are is outlined in Nick Redford's book, The Real Men in Black, where he describes one particular paranormal investigator's thoughts and personal beliefs on the subject by the name of Joshua P. Warren. In short, Warren believes that they are time travelers and have many details to back up this theory. He begins by theorizing that there may be humans or another race of hybrid beings that has discovered the secrets of time travel thousands of years in the future. And with that ability comes the need to travel through time, of course. Maybe the future is very harsh, and there could be a potential flaw in the reproduction system of future humans. In order to ensure their own futures, they need to come back in time and gather eggs and sperm from humans in our general time. Hence the need for the discovery of time travel. In order to do so, there has to be special vehicles produced that allow you to jump into the fifth dimension and pop back out anywhere along the timeline that you want to go. These crafts come in various sizes, shapes, and materials. Some are made of metallic type substance, and some are not made from a physical material at all, and are rather built of energy that look very much like a ball of light. Well, let's say that this time travel is actively monitored by a future agency that ensures the safety of the timeline. Meaning that if someone happens to witness a flying craft in the sky, maybe a ball of light outside their bedroom window, or even if someone was taken out their bed at oh, or even if someone was taken out of their bed at night and brought aboard an alien spacecraft, and that person could potentially set the timeline down a different path by releasing the information about their incidents. This agency could travel through time and stop them from doing so. They can't hurt anybody, as that will alter the timeline, but they need to make sure that certain pieces of information about this person's experience doesn't leak. They have all of the victim's secrets, since they can simply travel through time and monitor anybody at any moment in their lives. So they use those to scare experiencers into keeping their secrets to themselves. But there is a problem. They look nothing like us now. Maybe their skin is a bright purple, so they slap on some ultra white skin, and the only outfit that would be accepted in any time between the years of the 1900s and 2000s, an all black business type suit. They wear a hat and glasses to cover up either imperfections in their costume or to protect themselves from the different strength of UV rays our time sun gives off. Communication in their time is mostly done by way of computer or whatever technology they have at the time, and spoken word has fallen by the wayside. So their practice in talking with people is awkward and weird. In fact, if they were to be on a monitoring mission, they may not know how to properly hide the fact that they are watching you, due to their entire time being socially awkward. Now, I will admit that some of what I just said is my own inputs and details, but the frame of what I described was laid by Joshua P. Warren. And I love this theory, as it literally can cover up any flaws that anybody has found in any other theory we discuss. And the best thing about it is that the scenario that I laid out can be completely wrong, and this could all be happening for another reason. And yet the time traveler theory seems to be able to still do what it needs to even with different background stories applied. All right.
I do like the idea of vampires being more like interdimensional psychic vampires than actual vampires.
I had a feeling he was going that way.
It definitely fits my vibe, you know. I like that.
Yeah, you're vibing. See it.
Well, you know, it makes sense, and Jake would probably agree too. You know, like demonic entities, the jinn, whatever, right? Like this is how they would, in my opinion, this is one of the ways that they would fuck with you, right? Some of these demonic entities probably do feed off of negative energy, different energies, right? By different energies for different entities. So some of them, that's their shit. They just like to scare you, and boom.
Now, I feel like CJ would have some really good input on this kind of stuff because he's into the metaphysical and everything, and he probably could explain a lot of this to me. I'm personally not very much into the idea of something getting its nourishment or energy or whatever from fear. I just don't see that as a possibility. But I do find it interesting.
It's just, it's energy, right? Any energy is energy, right?
Yes, energy.
Yes, energy is energy.
Energy is energy, right? There's a Comrade Harris quote for you.
Energy is energy, and energy is energy. So
right.
If we had some energy, it would then be energy.
Right. But you get what I mean. Like, I don't know, maybe you don't vibe with that, but I'm one of these hippies, man. I feel like the whole universe is just nothing but frequencies and energies, and there's probably all types of parasitic entities that feed off of every type of frequency that you can imagine.
I do agree with energies and frequencies being a big building block of reality. I personally just don't know.
Have you ever seen that? I forget his name, and there's probably more than one guy, but he did the whole thing with water crystals, freezing water, and he would like speak to the water pleasantly, or he would like
and they'd form different shapes.
Right. And then same with the plants, right? They would grow the plants and they would talk pleasantly to the plants. They would grow and bloom great. And the ones that they were like shitty to, or like they died and didn't grow. It's the same concept, right? They're like feeding energy to these, I don't know what, the cells or something. I'm not really sure, but on some fractal level, that plant and those water crystals are absorbing the positive and the negative energy that you're putting forth.
I should get a cactus and yell at it every day.
But this is in there's theories that talk about like why cathedrals and stuff back in the day were built the way they were, right? I think we talked about this with Matt
For
in the Star
resonating,
Forge
yeah.
one time. Yeah, the resonation of all the stuff, and then the energies of all the people like in their praying and like all the positive energies, right? You just walk into some of those buildings and you can feel that energy, right? You don't have to be religious. Like shit, I'll walk into a freaking church or a mega church, especially, right? You get a vibe because so many people go there and they put so much positive energy into this location.
What do you think, Jake?
Couple things with this theory of like they're coming back in time to get eggs and sperm. Man, if they're that advanced, we're already being hatched out of eggs. Like, it's just better, right? Like, I think incubation rate for like a freaking swallow is like 12 days. Like, that's it, right? We're just hatching out of eggs at this point. And then also this whole wearing a hat and glasses to cover up either imperfections of their costume or to protect themselves from the different strengths of the UV rays of our time sun gives off. We know that the universe is expanding and one day we're going to get the heat death of the universe and all that sort of stuff, right? But do suns grow in strength and then explode, or do they weaken and then explode?
They grow in size, and the way that they do that is they start off with the most elementary elements. Think of the periodic
Right.
table, right? They burn through all the. I'm gonna fuck this up. I haven't looked at the periodic table in a while, but they burn through all the hydrogen, and then they burn through all the helium, and then they burn. It depends on what stage of burning they're at and what materials they're burning. And then they grow. It also depends on what kind of star you have, like red dwarves or red giants, white dwarves. There's a bunch of different kinds.
Yeah.
But basically the gist is that they expand and then they collapse on themselves, and then depending on what type of star it is, it could either go supernova or it could become a white dwarf, which is just basically like the moon, I guess. I don't know. Something along those lines.
So then technically it wouldn't be that, because they would come to our time frame and just be like, oh, what a relief. The sun isn't boiling our skin off. Oh, man, this is nice.
Yeah, but you also got to think that in order for that to happen by scientific standards, okay? Now, keep that in mind. By modern scientific standards,
I ain't no scientist.
They're talking millions of years.
Yeah.
The Men in Black don't need to be from millions of years. They only need to be hundreds or thousands of years.
Sure, but I mean, like, even at 1,000 years, their sun would be more intense than our sun, so it wouldn't be that.
It depends, right? I mean, you've been to San Francisco, you've been to China, or Japan. The smog, right?
Definitely San Francisco, yeah.
So UV strength during very smoggy, gross days is low, right? So let's say pollution continues to happen. We burn lithium mines, right?
No. That's ridiculous, because in 1,000 years, it's not going to be that. Everything's going to be green, and we're going to be hatched out of eggs.
I don't know.
Jeff knows.
Yeah, but however, we don't know how far in the future time travel gets invented, right? Time travel could get invented in 10 years from now or 100 years from now. It doesn't have to be 1,000. It doesn't be that far out, right?
Right.
It could be pretty soon, especially with like the way that AI and stuff is coming out. AI could figure that out
if they're
pretty quick.
talking about these people that are so different, but they're only wearing the only thing that kind of roots them in our time frame is their clothing.
You think
then
about
that means there's a tremendous amount of time for that
no,
evolution.
not at all, bro. We're already using CRISPR technology to genetically alter babies, dude. Like, give it a couple generations, and all human beings will probably be genetically modified. And
I'd rather be dead.
and you don't even right now they're doing that like there's a process, right? There's a whole process to make this happen. They're already putting like mRNA and this type of stuff in food. So it's only a matter of time before they're putting CRISPR technology and gene editing technology in food. There's going to come a day, maybe it's 100 or 200 years from now or 50 years from now, I don't know. They're going to come out and say some shit. It's going to be like, oh, for the sake of humanity or whatever the case might be, all of us have to mutate ourselves this way. And we'll do that by putting it in all the corn. And you don't have to worry about anything. It'll just be in the corn and your kids will come out mutated for the greater good, for grandma.
There'll be kids on the cob.
Look, all I want, right, is I want my hands and my arms, and like an alien, I want a second set of hands and arms down here that can like reach out and grab stuff while I'm out here doing this thing. That's all I want.
The only point of my rant is just that it's not necessarily going to take another X thousand years for us to evolve due to whatever the environment, right? Like with the way technology is moving, it might only take 50 to 100 years before we start seeing like drastic changes in human biology.
So I looked up the stars' order of burning elements because I was curious. I was right. It's hydrogen, then helium, followed by progressively heavier elements like carbon, oxygen, neon, and silicon. Depending on the star's mass, with the final stage often involving iron burning in very massive stars before they explode as supernova.
Where's the iron coming from?
It comes down from the breakdown of elements. The elements combined into compounds, and they become heavy metals.
Huh. Neat.
And you also got to think too that the iron that's burning isn't the iron like the stuff that we use. It's molten. So, yeah. If you ever played Minecraft, that's where iron comes from.
For those who died, said it'd be cool to think of the Men in Black as dimension police.
Well, that's sort of what I
Nice.
was just talking about there. It's if you remove the concept of time travel and you just keep the dimensional police idea, it's pretty much what I just said. I think it's plausible. I think it's possible. I personally like the idea of time travel. I think it's neat.
Well, of course it's neat. It's just impossible. That's all.
I don't know.
No,
we don't know that.
Impossible.
We don't know that. I don't know what to do with my hands. If you don't chew Big Red, then fuck you. All right, guys. Well, that was part 2 of MIB. Anybody in the chat have anything else to say? Say it now.
Or hold your peace until the next time we come here on Sunday.
Yeah. We have a guest next Sunday.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. We have the ladies from the Elephant in the Room podcast coming over.
Nice.
Yeah.
I put a link to our website in the chat for any of you nerds in the chat that want to click on it.
That, and if you don't follow us already here on Twitch, please hit the follow button. Great.
Yeah, hit follow. We're trying to hit that affiliate status. We need the follows. I think everybody that's in here might be following already, but if you're not,
then you better do it.
Do it now. And then click on that website link.
I clicked on the website link.
Yeah, I got to update that website. It's all old and stuff. I don't know. Just modernize it. All right. Well, what'd you guys think today?
It's better than yesterday. Yesterday was pretty hokey.
Oh, Kenzar brought up a good point. Leave a voicemail. So if you go to the website, Jake, are you on the website right now?
Yep.
Can you explain to the good people how to leave a voicemail?
Yeah, so when you get to the
Screen share it.
homepage,
You can screen share it.
Oh yeah, screen share it. Here, I can do it. I can do it.
I'll do it.
Oh, you do it then.
Yeah.
Anyways, when you do leave a voicemail, leave us an introduction that we could play before the episode. We used to do this a while back.
You see this? My mouse is circling it.
Oh yeah, there it is.
This thing, if you go to the homepage, doesn't matter how far down you scroll down, this is right here. If you click on it, it'll give you an option to leave a voicemail, and you just start recording, and then you can send it. You can give your name or be anonymous if you'd like. But like we put this out in the beginning with all of our listeners that, say you have a business that you want to promote to the few thousand people that listen to us. Frickin' come on here and say, hey, this is Jake from Infinite Rabbit Hole. Love your guys' stuff. Keep up the good work, whatever, right? And we'll put it on an episode. We'll throw it out there. So you could be like, hey, this is Sean from Sean's Concrete in, Omaha, Nebraska. Great hearing your stuff, and we'll throw it out there. If you want to give a little blurb about what you do or whatever it is, we'll put it on the next episode and we'll recycle it. And every few episodes, we'll play that. If we get enough of them, we'll just keep cycling them through. We used to do it a lot. So that's always an option for you to do.
Yeah, put on there like, yo, this is Frank with Frank's house. We're listening to the Infinite Rabbit Hole.
Frank house.
Yeah,
Frank's Frank house from Frankfurt, Germany.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
But we're listening to the Infinite Rabbit Hole, right? We can make a compilation of those one day with all the.
Throw your website down. Free advertisement.
Yeah.
Or if you guys just want to do a sweet intro for us and be like, hey, this podcast sucks. That's it. We'll play that too.
Hey, this podcast sucks, but keep listening.
We're talking to you, digital assassin.
Oh, yeah.
Kurt said we've even had cryptids call in before.
We
which
did.
Is true.
We had, actually, I have.
We
Fresno
had
Nightcrawler.
Yeah, he was pissed.
Yep. This is him, by the way.
Yep.
It says right here, this show sucks. It's my mouse pad.
And I'm also wearing a shirt that we got in Elmwood.
Oh, yeah, you are. I have that in orange.
Yeah.
Get in, loser. We're doing butt stuff.
That's right. I put that sticker on my toolbox at work. I'm waiting to see when I get called into HR and get thrown to the wolves.
All right. You guys got anything else to say?
Nope.
No, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the chat for coming in and checking out another live episode of the Infinite Rabbit Hole. We'll see you right back here next Sunday, October 13th, where we will be talking to the host of the Elephant in the Room podcast. Until next time, travelers, we'll see you right here in the next fork in the path of the Infinite Rabbit Hole. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Infinite Rabbit Hole podcast. If you're looking for more of our stuff, head on over to infiniterabbithole.com, where you can find links to all the podcast players that we are available on, and even our video platforms such as TikTok and YouTube. While you're there, make sure to check out all the links for our socials and hit that follow so you know when all the new stuff from our podcast comes out. And until next time, travelers, we'll see you right here in the next fork in the path of the Infinite Rabbit Hole. Goodbye.